Thank you so much for, I think Ryan and I'll just say a few words and then we'll see if we can get started with the video. But I know that it is such an incredible honor to be doing this today and connected. And thank you for, the kind words about the book. There's so many things that could be said and so forth. And one of the things is, Katja, every time I've had any interaction with you, and there haven't been so many yet, I learned so much, and I just really appreciate all the organizing that you demonstrated there. Not to mention, I'm not savvy enough to be on Twitter. But I first met you through your work on the Why We Gather article, and have just learned so much. And for those who haven't read Dr. Riesling Balde's book, We Are Dancing for You, I can say that it is absolutely incredible. And I read the first few lines of it, put my head down on my desk and cried, and assigned it to my graduate seminar without reading any more. And it was a complete success. So it's really an honor to be able to be here and to talk about the book, talk about work that we've been doing for a long time, that I've had the privilege to be a part of for a long time through Ryan's father, who you'll see some slides of. And it's been wonderful and amazing having Ryan at University of Oregon. We've done a few talks together, but this will be, as you can see already, a little bit, the technology is not quite the same as being together in person. And I also want to say I'm doing this today from Eastern Washington, from Walla Walla territory, not too far from Treaty Rock, where the Treaty Council was signed with Walla Walla, Cayuse, and I'm not sure everyone who was there. And the work that we've done on the Klamath, we've had good relationships with folks in Confederated Tribes of Umatilla and learned a lot from them around a lot of their food work. Especially, we did a collaborative work on freshwater mussels for about 2 years. So that's just a little bit to get us started. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kari. Ayuki Kitcheneth Wamanon Kuman Ryan Reed. Hello, I'm Ryan Reed, and thank you, Katja, and thank you, Kari, for having me and Kari on, on this webinar and this series. It's wonderful. I've kind of came into contact with Katja more on a personal and academic at the same time, as confusing as that is, but connections throughout my other siblings, and we actually met up in New Zealand too, and I think that was the first time I've actually interacted with Katja. And again, she's a phenomenal Native woman who has a lot of knowledge and is really exemplifying of what the next generations can aspire to. And I appreciate being on here today, and really just talking about my life is kind of what I'm here today. And I thank you, Kari, for kind of being that mentor and being that person to put me, let my voice be heard. And I don't think I would have the opportunity with not only today, but, previous opportunities in the past, that I would not be able to do what I'm doing today and where I'm at today. And so thank you for that. And so I'm Karuk Tribe. I'm actually a Hoopa Valley tribal member too. And so I grew up on Karigansa territory, right above Karamin, center of the world for Karuk people. Youngest sibling of many, and grew up in a community that really, communities, I guess, plural. And I want to acknowledge that I'm a part of and learned a lot from different communities within the Klamath Basin and outside too. And so I want to give credit where it's due, and the things that I know and who I am today is because of the communities that helped me through, and whether it's just giving me opportunities or giving me some more support. And so, I want to thank the people who have given me the knowledge and the courage to step up to certain opportunities that come to me. And so, again, I'm excited. This is like the first time we've, first of all, done like an online talk together, and this feels like it's kind of the first time it's being home with, other peers that I've grown up with. And I don't think a lot of people have seen me in this academic type of mindset. So it's exciting and a little bit of nervous tension with it, but, it's going to be awesome. So.
All right, thank you. So let's see, I'm going to try to stop sharing for a second there, start a new share. that is advanced, and we'll see if we can get the audio, and then it may not, it wants me to sign in, but it seems like you all could see. Let's see. Can you see that? Does it look like it's working?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So we'll wanted to just start really quickly. You know, there's so many ways, there's so many things to be said, and so many ways to tell the story. And certainly, you know, Ryan and I first met some 15, 18 years ago, and his dad and I, Ron Reed, and the whole Reed family have just changed my whole 3 generations of my family's life. And so just maybe by way of starting a little bit bigger picture for those who may not know as much about the Klamath Basin, starting with this film clip, it's just 2 minutes long, entitled Karuk Creation Story, that begins actually with showing images of Ron dip net fishing at Ishipishi Falls, and is narrated by Ryan's grandmother. And Ryan, I don't know if you want to say anything more about this video.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, it's funny because it's on YouTube, but you know, it hits all aspects of who we are, you know, on a spiritual level, and it connects on all levels. Like Kari said, some people might know a little bit about Karuk culture or Karuk people, but this video is a good introduction for people who have no idea about who we are. And so, and it's another thing at home that, you know, I just watch randomly, you know, when I'm kind of in a slump, you know, back in Eugene, and it really encompasses of where I come from, because my dad's in it, you know, I have uncles, cousins, and my grandma Vera, who passed away on years ago. And so it's kind of like, it's running down memory lane, and also like it's inspiration for the future as well. So this is an awesome video.
We dedicate this to the spirit people who walked before us, and to the people who will walk after us. The first spirit people from the center of the world netted the salmon. At Karamin was a spirit man. He made the salmon. He put them in a pool. When they got bigger, he put them in the river to go downriver to the ocean. When they returned, they were caught by a dip net. They taught us how to fish. That's why we do it this way. The first spirit people gave us the river and the salmon to survive. That's why we Karuk are called the river people.
That's what we live for right here. We like to give our fish to the elders. It shows a great amount of respect that our elders are very important, our babies are very important. And what we do this generation, our generation, is what's going to carry us on.
So I think that came through a little odd on the. Excuse me, I just got to get out of that.
It's another video too, so it's, I think it has
the
a lot.
video didn't come through quite right, I don't think.
But yeah, I guess I'll speak on that before, you know, we start our slides, and really what we're gonna speak on today, and what Karuk culture is about is, you know, a lot of it's exemplified in that video, and it's about spread transfer of knowledge from generation to generation. You see younger, those are actually my older siblings in that video, and so you can kind of see how long ago that was made, but it's still relevant today. And transfer of knowledge from the older generations to the younger, that's a huge aspect of cultural longevity that that we're striving for day to day, as Karuk people, and also just what it means to be a Karuk person. We're salmon people, we're acorn people, just like what Dr. Kutchbaldi originally said. So, and that's what it's about. If you look at those people in that video, that you see a sense of usefulness. That mental aspect becomes relevant and very apparent when you're practicing culture, and that's what that is. And so I don't want to go strictly on that video alone, because it's going to keep coming up throughout the talk today. And so I'll just say I'll keep that up for now.
Thank you. So, let's see. How do I now? Okay. So Ryan and I will just, kind of tag team back and forth, but we put together slides and talked a little bit about kind of how we'll do this. And, because we each have very different entry points, I would say, to the story and to this book, or to, these lives. I'm an academic, obviously. I'm not Native. My ancestry is Norwegian. My first book was about, set in Norway, and about some of the issues that people face in terms of environmental privilege. And so, my lens through this is, much more my involvement through the scientific process, and really kind of at the juncture of Indigenous and Western science in some very interesting ways. So we'll kind of tag team back and forth, and each sort of share things that seem relevant for you. And again, thinking about putting this together for this, thinking about water protection and Native California, it's really an honor to be a part of this. And we'll try to frame our comments in a way that are useful for this group of you. So my life changed quite dramatically in about 2004, I guess late 2003, when I met Ryan's father, Ron Reed. And we ended up working together, which we've been working together ever since on a variety of projects. And that research, our first research project, actually made it on the front cover of the Washington Post, because the ideas that were that research came, no tribe had claimed that a dam was giving them artificially high rates of diabetes before in a federal process. And that was the area that we came together on. So this is a little bit of that first report and the Washington Post story. And essentially, Ron had been working with the FERC process and traveling and giving a lot of testimony about the social, cultural, and health impacts of what was happening on the river, of the fact that the salmon can't get, those dams don't have fish passage, and so the salmon couldn't get up above them. And when Pacificor filed their final license application, it was, here's a picture of it, you can see, with the late Ronnie Pierce, who was a Karuk Tribe's advocate and one of Ron's mentors, was this tall, but did not reflect the issues that he had been facing. And Ryan, I can see you if you want to just signal, maybe wave your hand, whatever you want me to go or not.
Yeah, this is an 04, so you can kind of see. This is I was born in 2000, so you can see that you probably have a lot more intel on that than I do. So
that's all good. When I first met this young man, he wouldn't talk to me. He was like, he gave me a look. He's like, I don't know you. Anyway, so thinking about advocacy and river advocacy, the part of the story has been the relationship between the scientific process, the scientific report that we did, that I'll say a little bit more about as well, which describes many of the issues that Ryan and his family and community live intimately. And then it's also been about advocacy in the streets. And so very early on, my partner, my husband, and I joined a tribal delegation to Scotland that was putting pressure on Pacificor around the dams. So you can see the resemblance of the sign that Ron Reed there and Merv George Jr. are holding to the book title. And I also I should get more people on these pictures. There's many, many, many people that I have learned from, that I continue to learn from. Some of them are pictured here. And, it's really the work that I've been doing again, it's been sort of at this, there's a lot of racism and colonialism in the fact that I'm even in the picture here, because Ron had been, traveling to meetings, talking about his experiences, talking about the ways that his community's health were impacted by those dams, impacted by the loss of salmon and all these things. And it didn't get traction until he and I started working together, and I, with a PhD, began looking at some of the scientific data, these kinds of things. And that's when it became very powerful. So we can look at this as a positive story of the ways that the blending of indigenous science and Western science can be very powerful in advocacy. But I do want to acknowledge that there's also something wrong with his voice not having been taken seriously prior to that. And I've had the privilege to do a variety of other policy work, including Ryan gave some input as well on the most recent of that, which is a Karuk Tribe's climate adaptation plan. But the Karuk have been doing a lot of really important work and really innovative work in a variety of ways around fire, around knowledge sovereignty, as you can see here.
Yeah, I'll speak on a little bit of that. Just again, Kari's phenomenal, PhD, who has done tremendous amount of work from an academic standpoint. And so like she mentioned before, we come in at different, come into the story at different times and in different pathways. And so one of the few things is just the incoming junior in academia is that a lot of what I know and what I talk about is from life experience and kind of learning, that's having that credibility of growing up in this landscape. That's where I come from, and growing up and with my dad being a part of this work and having that those partnerships with Kari and people from Berkeley or people from Stanford. And, I grew up with that atmosphere and going to, I was like a kid traveling down Sacramento, going to protests, and fighting for our salmon. And those are my early childhood memories, coinciding by going fishing at the Ishipishi Falls. And those are the earliest memories I'd ever had. And so I was kind of born into this cultural and traditional lifestyle, partnered with academics. And I didn't really understand that until I got in academia and kind of started grabbing towards myself and create my own narrative. And so it's important and to acknowledge the, I guess, for lack of better terms, the fight that Kari people have had to endure and start, from the beginning, whether it's federal recognition in the 70s, 80s, to just fighting for basic necessities of life. And that's for us. So we just want our salmon to come home. We want our salmon to be healthy. And that means our people to be healthy. And the fact that it takes decades, pioneered in a century worth of work that needs to be done in order for those basic human rights to be met. It goes to show of, how much a fight it is and how relevant a fight it is for us Karuk people and other tribes and people on the Klamath River and the Klamath Basin. And so this work that Kari's been doing is taking strides, taking large revolutionary steps. And the way she does it is also has had a larger impact. Historically you've had white settlers come into our ancestral territory and kind of just take notes about us and then, claim it theirs and take off with it. But I feel like this work that Kari has done is a lot of collaborative, a lot of having a building of relationships. And that's who we are as people, is building relationships, whether it's with non-natives, our own people, or, the natural environment alone. And this is really encompassing, and it really shows significance of where we want to be as Karuk people.
Really appreciate, those words, and thinking about, again, it's like not knowing the background of everybody. And I know that all of you are on this call by a lot of diverse background, but I would say that is what Ryan just said about relationships is one of the things that as a non-native person, I think I've so learned from working, working with all of you and your family in particular, but, working with everyone in the kind of community is how things work, face-to-face relationships, and the benefit of being able to learn through them and share things, and the generosity that I've seen in my direction and watched towards others through those relationships are, I think, incredibly important for all of us to understand as we live in this advanced capitalist society where we are taught, that everything is just about money. I want to say that this is exciting to be doing this book in this forum, and I'm really honored and flattered. And I'm definitely honored and flattered that this book is useful for people in the community on the Klamath. But I guess I wouldn't have had the audacity to write a book sort of about the community for the community per se. And it is an academic book. I think, there's a lot of people's words in it, and, a lot of quotes, a lot of narrative that make it much more accessible probably than some academic books. But I actually wrote this book because of all the things I've been learning with the Reed family and other folks there, everyone in the Karuk DNR, Department of Natural Resources. I started at some point, after having done a lot of these reports, going back to my own discipline of sociology and realizing that things were just really unacceptable. And so actually, we are right now, this group of people who see pictured as part of a core group of folks who are just been granted permission, or not, that's not the word I want to use. We've just been given the go-ahead to start forming a section within the American Sociological Association on Indigenous peoples. That organization has also done, beginning to do other decolonizing things. So this book was written really to take my colleagues to task and hopefully improve the thinking within sociology vis-a-vis Indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge and all of these kinds of things. And I just
want to speak briefly about the book and generally and the background of that. And it is an academic book and a phenomenal one alone. And, Kari people are world renewal people. And so that means that a lot of our ceremonies, a lot about of what that means is we're trying to fix the world, and that's important when speaking about Kari people, is that we're not only trying to save ourselves or the people in our basin, but it's collective, everywhere. And it's important when, sharing my narrative and who I am and the knowledge that I have thankfully been given, also that I've lost, but that's another can of worms, is that we're praying for you, people who I don't even know. And that's a part of the ceremonies itself. And with a land-based religion, we can't have our culture anywhere else in this world. And it's connected directly to the land. Our people, our ceremonies, our practices are connected directly to this land, and that's a spiritual connection. And what Kari's been able to do with this book is that she's able to tie environmental injustices with sociology, and that's something that's often unheard of. She's tapping into a collective, interdisciplinary collective work that is really relevant within our culture, and she's able to bridge that gap between academia and also just us as Native people in academia. And that those are large steps when thinking about us as Kari people, is that we don't just think about the environment. We just don't think about social aspects alone. We don't think just about physical aspects. It's a collective, it's interdisciplinary. And when you go on tangents about, generally speaking, go on tangents about certain aspects of our culture, that's just part of the story. It's everyday life. It has different meanings, whether it's going out and actually physically burning the landscape to help the environment, thrive. But also it's giving that person who's putting the fire on the landscape a sense of well-being, and you're out there physically doing that, and you're also benefiting spiritually and mentally too. And so that's Kari's work to be able to put that on paper and for people to really understand that is, again, large steps.
There's so many ways to tell stories or things to say about it, but one thing I for sure wanted to acknowledge, and it relates a lot to Ryan's words right there, are just all of the ways that the activity and the things that people are doing in the basin spread outward. And so in terms of the larger advocacy and larger ripple effect. And one of the ways is, Ryan mentioned going to protests and things down in Sacramento, going to rallies, but also speaking. And so I just have a few slides of Ron and I speaking in different contexts recently. This is Longhouse at University of Oregon. Ron and Robin there spoke to my environmental justice class. I think this was just this past February or March, but I don't fully remember. I think this was actually just as the pandemic was really starting. This was perhaps the year before, but University of Oregon, Ryan's brother Jason there, cooking fish. And then my sons, you can see Ryan and several of his brothers and folks, my son's grade school, elementary class, and this is my graduate class at University of Oregon. So, and then this was a panel that we did with Jess Conrad there with the microphone, a panel that we did in Aotearoa in New Zealand on cultural burning, which was cultural burners from Australia and as well as folks from the US. And so there's just a lot of ways that that the work that's happening there, that's happening in the Klamath Basin is people are doing so much that's sort of stretching, moving beyond it, telling stories in ways beyond it. I think Katja mentioned that the book has these sort of various chapters and standalone pieces in a way. And I thought I'd just quickly put the table of contents. I think we'll just speak maybe more specifically about the stuff around food and health, which is in chapter 3. But for those that may be interested to see the bigger picture or the larger piece of it, within my discipline, within sociology, it was really kind of came the idea that humans were no longer connected to nature because everyone was so modern and in cities and things like that. And so there's really wonderful theories about gender and race, and there's a strong sort of, I would say, social justice component to my discipline, but there really isn't, that work isn't linked well with anything about how the natural world affects things. So the first chapter is looking at theories of race and how what we think of as whiteness gets created and how white supremacy gets created in relationships with the natural world. The second chapter is looking at settler colonialism and how fire suppression belongs. Both of those first two chapters are a little bit historical concepts of fire suppression as an example of a way of illustrating the importance of thinking about colonialism. And certainly it's been exciting to me in the last year, 6 months, 3 weeks. It just feels like the general public's understanding about colonialism and settler colonialism is really growing. We'll talk more about the third one, but that's the chapter that looks at relationships between health and mental health and food and traditional foods, and really came out of the work on the policy work on the dams. There's a chapter that we won't talk about unless Ryan wants to bring it up, or it ends up coming up, that's really about gender practices and sort of how different parts of people's identities as identifying as female or male are connected to practices in the landscape, and what does it mean when you can't do those. And this chapter and then the next one all of these chapters really came out of Indigenous thinking, and Ron Reed in particular is talking about how all of these things are connected as we were working on the FERC relicensing. So at some point he was saying, we have to, this is about masculinity, we have to talk about what does it mean for our young men. And then the last substantive chapter, thinking about emotions, and he's talking as well about the importance of everything that was happening with the river and other aspects of things in the land, how this is about mental health and people's sense of well-being.
Right.
So say some words about this. You saw this image on the screen and the other one, but this is, as people may or may not know, if I could see you all, I would ask how many people know where this is or what's going on here, but I can't see those who are listening. So,
sorry to interrupt first. Do you mind if we go back one slide? I kind of want to talk on chapter 2 slightly, just to give more context of history. You can hear a couple of words about the historical past that us as Kari people had to endure, and but I kind of want to take a step in specifically that title of ecological dynamics of settler colonialism, smoky bear and fire suppression as colonial violence. And so as Kacha introduced us and a little bit about the work that's been going on in Kari country, a lot of it's fire, and I think that's one of the leading work as the Karuk Tribe has been able to partner up with certain organizations around like our communities, is fire, trying to reestablish the relationship with fire onto the landscape and with our people. And like, we've talked about this many times in our talks, Kari, but the violence that occurs with fire suppression, and I think I usually say this in almost every talk because I want people to really understand the violence, the historical violence that really occurred beneath my feet right now, right here. In addition to, it's important to acknowledge that there's no romanticized history when it comes to genocide. The Kari people had a bounty, the state set aside bounty money for Kari people's scalps for if they were caught setting fires. And so that means that, every person that's Kari people, fire is a part of our religion, and it's part of our identity. And when you're targeted, so that means you just automatically have a target on your back when you're trying to set fire. That's a religious practice, and that happened right here in Orleans. And a lot of the racism that was institutionalized from the Forest Service or from the federal government, the people who are supposed to be protecting us, that was embedded within law, that was embedded with institution, and that's directly tied with fire suppression. And the fact that I can go outside right now and see the smoke that's really up in our face, that's direct colonial violence. That's the lack of fire that's been put on the landscape within the past 100 years. It's kind of hard to not see that we're still in a state of turmoil, a state of war, when you got elders or people with health issues who can't really persevere through this smoke and these bad air qualities. That's colonial violence. And the fact that people don't really understand, don't really see that. When you first see smoke, like, oh, there's a fire. But, for me, I grew up with smoke summer to summer, some thicker, some closer, some further away. But, that's direct violence. That's my ancestors being targeted, being murdered because they were practicing their religion. And now that these fires are occurring because, in order for us to survive, we had to stop doing that. And, there's a lot of different complexities and that are really relevant from the history to now. And so before, I wanted to just kind of make that apparent when diving into the different topics, especially the one that's coming up is food relationships and the links of environmental and human health. Is, a lot of what this chapter is about is just, basic health, nothing more, nothing less. We're not asking for a whole lot more than just basic necessities of, religious freedom. And again, like we're a world of no people. And so when speaking about that, it's collective of different departments, in a more modern context. And so it affects us on such a collateral level.
Thank you for those words, because it's, the situation with fire is incredibly important, and, there's not a lot that we would have necessarily touched on there, but it's certainly interwoven as well with with climate change and with fish in the river. And there's a wonderful website that we've put together related to the Karuk climate adaptation plan. It's called Karuk Climate Change Projects. And on that website, there are actually 3 different videos. One is like a 2-minute video, a 6-minute video, and then there's a 30-minute video about what the tribe is doing in relation to fire in light of climate change. And there's also a little bit of the history that Ryan mentioned is touched on in some of those. So thank you for those words. It's also an example, you know, I feel like as a scientist, as a human, my life has just been incredibly powerfully impacted. I've learned so much. I learned so much every time I'm on the river interacting with your family, Ryan, and it's just remarkable. So it's been quite a pleasure. And this image is of the behind Iron Gate Reservoir, the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, which is highly toxic. And so those dams are, and I don't know what it looks like right now. I don't know, Ryan, if you've seen recently or just with the river, you start seeing algae in the river as well. The dams on the Klamath River, I guess we don't have an overview slide, but the dams on the Klamath River are slated to come out in 2 more years, we hope. I know there's been just a recent ruling by FERC that does keep that process moving forward. And, but as I mentioned before, you know, this first project that Ron and I did is really about the blending of Indigenous science and Western science. And in that, obviously, there was a lot of Western science that's being used to document what's happening. The kind of water quality program, the Department of Natural Resources are using a lot of Western science, documenting what's happening in the river, temperatures, all of the sediment levels, algal levels. We had tissue samples from fish, which was one of the things that the California Fish and Game was thinking. But because of the work that Ron had been doing, Ron had been talking about his mother, whose voice you heard on the video. She always talked about freshwater mussels, and no one was talking about freshwater mussels. And so we started a project on freshwater mussels, actually with folks here where I am speaking to you from in Walla Walla. The Confederated Tribes of Umatilla have been doing work on freshwater mussels. And so because there had been a project ongoing on freshwater mussels, when the tissue samples were tested to see, Pacificor was claiming that all of this stuff that you see in the lake had actually no downstream effects, was actually not bothering Karuk people at all because there was no downstream effects of their dams. Well, because we tested the tissue of freshwater mussels, we were able to find the bioaccumulated these cyanobacteria, which is highly toxic. So this is just one little example of the ways that Indigenous and Western science together was very powerful in the work that we've done. I don't know if you want to say anything about the algae. But.
As salmon people, algae has probably been one of the largest problems within our river system. And, you know, like I mentioned before, I'm the spring salmon ceremonial priest in Namwan. And so, and it's kind of relevant, it is relevant because I'm actually fasting for that right now as we're speaking. And I made the medicine less than a week ago, or about a week ago, a little over a week ago. Sorry, I forget what day I'm on. And when, you know, during that time of making medicine and being in seclusion, being isolated from, being more isolated than we usually are right now, than, you know, from my relations is, you know, one of my tasks for me on the physical aspect is that, you know, I have to bathe in the river where my camp is. And this year, you know, every year to year, it's my 3rd year doing it. And it, you know, the river quality is getting worse and worse. And this year has been probably the most extreme that I've had to deal with. And you know, from people who live on the Klamath River, you know, hearing me say I have to bathe in the Klamath River, you're alone, you might cringe. And this year, if you go down to where I had to bathe, you wouldn't even want to step foot in it. And you know, there's invasive species such as, you know, bluegill, sunfish, I think that's the same thing, but bass, and, you know, large areas of just seaweed and moss and accumulation of all in together of algae. And that's a direct effect from the dams, the lack of water in the system, and the extreme temperatures that, we endure year to year during the summertime, when, that's we're the most vulnerable as the river is. And, on a personal basis, I'd bathe in that, multiple times a day. And the fact that, I guarantee if I go up to the people in power who are, fighting to keep this dam in, that, I'd tell them, what I just think to myself is, I'm going to go grab a jar of that water and tell them to bathe with it, and that's my religion right there. If you're holy water, or whatever religion that they practice, if they have to cleanse with that in their spiritual way, like, and they don't want to, like, that's what I have to do. That's just because that I don't have access to clean water, because of my lack of privilege, and economically, and as far as my lifestyle, that there's just no leveling. There's no understanding with the people in power who are fighting to keep these dams in and these water qualities low. And again, I'm a spring salmon ceremonial priest, and so what I'm also thinking about is the spring salmon. And they're one of our largest, historically one of our largest food sources. And now that we can't even really fish for them, and we've caught some in the past down the Ishipichu Falls and stuff like that, but that's like 2 or 3 out of the year. And when one of our main food sources has been limited to 2 times or 3 times in the year, what do you expect when you see all these different mental and physical health disparities and problems occur? It's only basic common sense that these things are going to happen when your food sources becomes ill, or become full of bioaccumulation and all that stuff. And so when speaking about salmon and speaking about these different resources, when our main staple, our spirit of our culture is being treated or having to endure through these different water qualities and these different conditions, it's problematic from the roots.
So powerful to speak with you, do this with you. Looks like we did get a picture of the dam. I think this one came from National Geographic, and I'm not sure I gave a photo credit there. So sorry about that. Yeah, so this work in this chapter of the book came out of the work that Ron and I have been doing, and that Ryan's been involved with in many increasing dimensions through his life, through the time that this has been ongoing. The book chapter, I was really reflecting a lot on the relationships between Indigenous and Western science, and the ways that, that there's a lot of successes, because our work actually did get quite a bit of traction, both in getting media attention, but also in the scientific process as well. And I think it's precisely because Indigenous knowledge that was centering all those connections, and Ron's saying, this is about our physical health. First of all, just seeing that the difference, I think that this is the slide I want here, that his community has gone from getting their food from dipping out of the falls to commodity, people having not enough food or having commodity food coming out of cans, and the multiple layers of that. And if you took this, say, from a strictly Western science perspective, you might be thinking about variables and how to control these variables, and what's separate from what, and can you separate the amount of diabetes that comes from not having fish versus the amount that comes from not having exercise, or the fact that people drink alcohol, or all of these different, thinking about things as sort of separate. But in working with Ron, it was so clear that it made sense for us to be showing that these are all connected. So that if you are, so the crux of the work, stepping back for a second, is the report that was filed, Effects of Altered Diet on the Health of Karuk People, showed that Karuk people had very high rates of diabetes, and that basically the time period through which families were developing diabetes and heart disease, and as well, was corresponded with the drop in people's salmon consumption. And I didn't put in a ton of slides from the data, but the report is available online, and as are sort of shorter versions and chapters, but also it talks about it in the book if you're interested. And so this way of, instead of trying to separate, like, oh, you can't prove that, or you can't show, that there's this relationship there. It's like, well, people live this relationship. It's really obvious that the dams that have no fish ladders were causing the loss of salmon, and that the loss of salmon had so many multiple layered effects in the community. And so again, that framing in that report made it to the front page of the Washington Post because no tribe had claimed that in FERC before, or no one had claimed, that a dam was giving them artificially high rates of diabetes. So again, the basic framing was all coming out of indigenous science and lived experience. But then what we did is we looked at health data, we looked at historical records, this material. So essentially the bigger picture on that is that people have been eating large amounts of salmon, 7 or 8 runs of salmon up the Klamath River. People, stored it in different ways, but that has basically more recently disappeared and gone to much smaller amounts. Did you want to say? I feel like I just kind of went on a roll there.
No, you're killing it.
Okay, this is all. So one of you'll be moved to speak in a minute, I'm sure. One of the things that is really striking to me in doing this work is that Karuk people have had one of the most recent and dramatic diet shifts of indigenous people in the United States. So there's other, folks like even the Yuroks down on the mouth have, more access to fish, and folks up in Alaska as well having more access to fish. But that, and then in other communities, those traditional foods and the extent of colonialism was so extreme, and the forced assimilation was so extreme, so that it happened quite, a century ago. But that really it's in people's lifetimes, lived experience, that people went, oops, sorry, I thought I had a different slide there, that people went from having, salmon several times a day, as much as they could eat, to really having almost none at all.
And yeah, I'll speak on that real quick, and just to acknowledge our time check. I want to give time for Q&A and stuff like that.
Yeah, let's do it.
This little portion is short, but those stats that Kari put up on the slides, and I've experienced that within my small time I've been on this earth. And in that video at the beginning of our presentation, and my dad was loading up a large amount of salmon right there in one dip. And, we talk about this every time, I was probably just born or, 1 or 2 years old during that times. And I grew up, my early times of childhood, like just watching those large amounts of fish coming out of those falls, and up to probably the maximum 150 fish a day coming out of the falls that would get distributed to the community, or people who would come down and help and work for food and stuff like that. And first of all, that relationship is immense in cultural longevity. But now, if you skip forward to the last 5-6 years of my life, there's been years of single digits in a year. I remember one year my dad caught maybe 5 or 6 in the whole year. And it's crazy that dramatic drop in population that our people are consuming of salmon. It's unsustainable as human beings, and just environmentally degrading, and so that's kind of a reflection and reality of the life that us as Kari people are having to deal with.
I think this is the almost the last slide. So there are other chapters, look at how all of this, so again, there's a chapter on fire. Ryan touched a little bit on that. There's so much there, but also looking at gender, looking at emotional impacts, and how physical and emotional are connected. And all of this is so much from Ron Reed's thinking and understanding. And then, I've worked with it in an academic sense, and I try to put it in conversation with the other conversations that I know are happening in the policy world and in the academic world. But closing really the conclusion of the book, and closing our talk now, thinking about one of the things that's most powerful to me is, and Katja mentioned it well, the resilience of Karuk people, and the resourcefulness, and I don't know if hopefulness is exactly the word, but the sense that that you don't get to give up, and And my other work on climate change is about very different communities and more about in the broader public, you see people becoming upset, but not really engaging and sort of jumping in. And this is a quote I have up that Ron, I don't remember exactly where we were when he said this, wrote it down, and I was like, wow. Because this idea of seeing climate change as a strategic opportunity. So he says, we're trying to get back to an intact world. Climate change can be a vehicle for that because of the awareness it brings to so many about limitations in the current management practice. We believe there's genuine interest in Karuk perspectives about how to care for the land, and we offer these explanations in the hope that this is true. This was used in the front of our climate adaptation plan, and possibly also in the knowledge sovereignty reports that were also around climate change. And to me, these words sum up so much of what I think as a Western scientist is incredibly important as a non-native person to understand about indigenous perspectives, indigenous values, knowledge systems, all of these kinds of things, that there really is, my ancestors came from Scandinavia, and what they came to a place that had a lot of stuff that was doing pretty well, and it sure doesn't look like that now. And yet so much indigenous knowledge is still present, not only in terms of fire practice and all these specific techniques and these kinds of things or the ceremonies, but also in terms of ways of being in the world. And I know that I learned so much from you and your family, Ryan, all the time, and everyone at Karuk DNR and other folks there. So it's the work that we've spoken about has changed my life in the most profoundly wonderful ways.
Yeah, and what I kind of one of the few things I want to last say is what my dad, just said in this quote, that climate change can be a vehicle. That's apparent. I can speak all day about the atrocities, the violent history, and the lifestyle that we have to endure on a negative note, but on a positive note, there's a lot of work being done, and there's a lot of people who are in the positions that creates hope for our next generations. And for me as an individual, as a young man in this world, growing up on this landscape, there's a lot of hope for the future generations. And I'm already thinking about future generations at age 20. And I think that's a concept that often gets overlooked and unheard, is, what our culture all is about as Karuk people. And I mean, really Native people entirely is keeping that culture continuing. And the work that's being done as far, putting fire on a landscape, all these WKRP and all these different partnerships, what they're doing is creating a future. They're continuing our future as people to live off this land. And it's phenomenal to see. And amongst all the devastations that I keep seeing as I grow up, there's the other side of positivity is starting to increase and starting to catch up. And so it's promising to see all this work and all these phenomenal people, these opportunities come through. And again, like, this work is interdisciplinary. And so if you're thinking that you have no ability to not speaking specifically just Karuk people, but as Native people generally, is you have the ability as an academic in these different positions to create change in these Native communities, or in any community, for what you will. And so a lot of it is just about building relationships and being a community to help the environment. And in an era of climate change, it's only relevant that certain people step up, and that's what's going to take, is people to step up and work together.